Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel BioUniverse. I am Soyanka and today we will learn reproduction. Reproduction is one of the fundamental attributes of a living organism through which it is able to produce more of its own kind. Through this process, new individuals are produced that grow and reproduce again, thus increasing the population of a species. Organisms produce similar offspring but not exact copies of themselves. The offspring have similar body structures and similar genetic blueprints, that is DNA, in their cells. At the cellular level, reproduction involves first making a copy of its DNA and creating the cellular apparatus for the new cell. Then the nucleus divides and separates the two copies of DNA. Finally, the cytoplasm divides and separates the cellular apparatus. Thus, a cell divides to produce two new similar cells. DNA carries information for making proteins. Errors in the copying of DNA cause variation in the offspring. Due to this tendency for variation, organisms do not create exact copies during reproduction. Variation is important for the survival of a species over a period of time. Variation gives some individuals in a population the ability to cope with changes that others cannot withstand. Suppose there is a sudden drop in environmental temperature. As a result, some organisms will die due to severe cold, but some of them that have developed the ability to cope with extreme cold will survive and reproduce. Reproduction in living organisms takes place by two general methods, asexual and sexual. Asexual reproduction takes place without the process of gamete formation. There are different forms of asexual reproduction. Binary fission is one of them, in which division of one cell into two similar cells occur. It is the simplest method of asexual reproduction. It occurs in unicellular organisms like bacteria, yeast, euglena, amoeba, and paramecium. Some of the single-celled organisms divide and form many daughter cells. This process is called multiple fission, which is seen in many algae and malarial parasite Plasmodium. Sometimes new individuals develop from the body wall of the parent as bulb-like projections called buds. These buds separate to form new individuals. Budding occurs in yeast, hydra, and spongage. When a spirogyra filament breaks into pieces, each piece grows into a new filament by cell division. This process is known as fragmentation. Some animals like sponges, hydra, and planaria also reproduce by a similar method known as regeneration. If they are cut into pieces, each piece can regenerate into an entire individual. Vegetative propagation is common in plants like orchids, ornamental plants, and grasses. In this process, vegetative parts of a plant such as root, stem, leaf, etc. can produce new plants. Plants such as banana, rose, jasmine, etc., which do not produce seeds, can also be grown by vegetative method. In some plants like dahlia, sweet potato, etc., the adventitious roots become swollen due to storage of food. Adventitious buds are also present on them. When roots bearing such buds are planted in the soil, new plants are produced as a result of vegetative propagation. The fleshy leaves of Bryophyllum bear adventitious buds in the notches along the leaf margin. These buds develop into small plantlets. Under favorable conditions, these plantlets can be easily separated to grow as independent plants. Sexual reproduction results in new combinations of genes that are brought together during gamete formation. This type of reproduction involves the two sexes, namely male and female. The reproductive part of a flowering plant is the flower. Flowers can be unisexual or bisexual. Flowers bearing either the male or the female sex organs are unisexual. For example, watermelon, cucumber, etc. Flowers having both sex organs are bisexual flowers. For example, hibiscus, pea, etc. The axis of flowers has two parts. The stalk of the flower are called pedicel and its swollen top called thalamus. A typical flower consists of four sets of floral parts or holes: calyx, corolla, androecium and gynoecium. Calyx and corolla are not directly involved in reproduction. Androecium and gynoecium are directly concerned with sexual reproduction. Calyx is the outermost hole. It consists of sepals. The sepals are usually green, but sometimes they may be colored. Calyx protects the floral holes in the bud stage. Corolla, the next inner hole, consists of petals. Petals may be white or brightly colored. They attract insects towards the flower and thus help in pollination. Corolla protects the reproductive holes in the bud stage. The stamens are collectively called androecium, which are third hole. Each stamen consists of a filament and an anther. Each anther has two chambers called pollen sacs. If you touch the stamens of a flower, a yellowish powder may come off on your hands. Anthers produce these numerous yellowish pollen grains which contain male gametes. The gynoecium or pistil is in the center of the flower. It is the fourth hole. It bears the female reproductive organ called carpel. Each carpel consists of three parts: a basal swollen portion called ovary, a narrow stalk-like middle portion called style, and one to many lobed flattened disc-like sticky structure called stigma at the top of the style. The ovary is surrounded by an outer wall. The ovary may be divided into chambers. The chambers contain ovules. Each ovule has an egg cell that is female gamete. The transfer of pollen grains from the anthers of a flower to the stigma of the same or another flower is known as pollination. The transfer of pollen to the stigma of the same flower or the flowers borne to the same plant is known as self-pollination. It happens in pea and hibiscus. Cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen from the anthers of a flower to the stigma of flower on another plant of the same species. Pollen can be carried with the help of many agents such as insects, birds, wind, and water. The pollen grains germinate on the stigma after pollination. The inner wall of the pollen grain grows into a pollen tube which grows down through the style and finally reaches the ovule. Inside the ovule, a male gamete fuses with the female gamete and a zygote is formed. This is known as fertilization. The zygote divides repeatedly to form the embryo future plant in the ovule. The embryo possesses a teeny future root that is radicle, a teeny future shoot that is plumule, and cotyledons to store food. The ovary grows rapidly to form the fruit. The ovary wall ripens and forms the fruit wall. The sepals, petals, stamens, style, and stigma of the flower degenerate and usually fall off. Sometimes the sepals may persist in the fruit. The ovule develops into a seed. The wall of the ovule thickens to form the protective seed coat. The seed loses water and becomes hard and dry. Seeds can be withstand drought and other adverse conditions in this state. This is an advantage for seed producing plants. The embryo lies dormant in the seed, but under favorable environmental conditions, it becomes active and germinates to form a small seedling.